11th of July, 1943, so 5 Osha, Gela, Sicily. The surf is black glass and the air tastes of salt and cordite. In the gray before sunrise, engines somewhere inland grind awake, a low metallic growl that carries across the flat fields to the waterline. The beach is a thin line of men and sandbags and tossed coils of wire, a place that feels too small for the sounds rolling toward it. A ranger crouches behind the seawall with wet sleeves and a heartbeat too loud in his ears. A radio man from the 1st Infantry Division hunches over a handset that keeps slicking under his palms. Far out past the breakers, a gunnery officer aboard Savannah glances at a plotting board that fogs when he leans too close and draws one more pencil line to the shore. A destroyer captain trims his ship closer than the book says is wise, counting seconds between the swell and the shoal. The first light brings edges, the wheat on the plain, ragged stone walls, the church tower in Gela staring seaward like a warning. The men on the sand do the math with their eyes. Tanks need room to run, and this beach gives them a runway. That's the fear, steel on sand, tracks chewing a path straight for the water. That's what the engines inland promise. But there is another math, drawn in arcs and ranges, the kind the sea can solve. Guns over the horizon, heavy and patient, waiting for a grid and a word. The paradox hangs in the morning, a tank's charge against a ship's reach, and for a moment it feels like belief will decide which one wins. A gust pushes the smell of diesel across the beach. At 05:12, Tracer reaches for the pier and snaps short, green sparks falling into the surf. The ranger blinks grit from his eyes and can't help looking left and right to make sure the line is real, that other faces are still there. The radio man wipes the handset on his sleeve, hears voices stack on the net, some too fast, some too calm, all of them pressing the same truth. The shore guns aren't where they need to be yet. Everything here is new and fragile, like a bridge that hasn't set. If the weight comes too soon, it'll crack. A minute later, a whisper runs the beach. Armor. The word skids along the sand like a shell casing. The ranger doesn't see tanks yet. Only the dust lifting behind the first stone walls inland, a tan ribbon unrolling with the day. He feels for the bayonet notch out of habit and thinks how ridiculous a blade is if a tank gets to the waterline. The radio man hammers the handset with a thumb and reads back a coordinate that feels absurdly small against the size of what's coming. Savannah's gunnery officer checks the wind and the sea state and the range to the first target box they've agreed upon. He knows these are land guns he's reaching for, moving targets on roads that don't sit still for mathematics. Boise lies a little farther off, turrets facing shore like patient beasts waiting to breathe. Their steel is cool now. It won't be for long. The beach speaks in fits and starts. A machine gun coughs. Someone yells for more sandbags and gets laughter because there are already more sandbags than hands. A line of men on the right shifts a dozen yards because a fresh slope gives a better field of fire. Time stutters. The air grows hot without warning, as if the sun rose in a single step. The ranger's mouth goes dry. He imagines tracks cresting the last rise, and for 2 heartbeats he's somewhere else, one winter earlier, thinking the worst sound in war is a door hinge opening at night. He was wrong. The worst sound in war is a tank that hasn't appeared yet, but already owns your breath. Stand by, the handset says. It isn't a request, it's gravity. The radio man swallows and repeats it for men he can't see. A few yards away, a medic smooths a bandage that doesn't need smoothing, eyes pinned to the inland haze. On the water, the destroyer captain feels the bottom's pull change under his keel and edges in another cable length. The helmsman doesn't ask why. He can hear the land, too. A moment to breathe, then a hammer beat of distant bombs steps down near the piers, heavy thumps that push the tide outward and then suck it back. Spray comes up foul and greasy. A pier post shrieks and leans, then thinks better of it. The ranger's shoulders knot. The radio man keeps his thumb on the transmit key because letting go feels like falling. Somewhere between fear and duty, a voice on the net climbs clear. The grid is crisp. The correction is sharper. Shot, a calm tone says from the water. The ranger looks up because the beach looks up, all together, as if there were one neck and one pair of eyes. There is nothing yet. Just a pause, and a gull that doesn't care. Then, far out and low, a sound like a door of the world being slammed shut. It is not close, and it is not far. It is everywhere. before the first pillars of water lift, before the beach feels the boom as a touch through the soles of its feet, before the destroyer's deck straps sing with tension and the plotting board rattles against its clips, before Boise and Savannah begin the long conversation that will decide the day, there's a breath of disbelief. Can the sea really reach the plain? Can a ship's anger cut a road? If stories like this move you, if you want more untold turning points that begin with a time and a place and end with history bending, subscribe to What If Wars. Then stay with me, because this morning isn't done speaking. The engines inland grow louder, the dust thickens, and the horizon, black and patient, is about to answer. The sun climbs and shows its teeth. Inland, the road from Nishemi threads down toward the coastal plain, a ribbon cutting through wheat and dust. The Hermann Göring Panzer Division feels its way forward, armored noses nudging past stone walls that once kept goats and now try to keep history. You can hear the weight before you see it, the rumble that sits in your chest, the higher clatter of road wheels, the occasional bark of an engine pushed hard by a driver who wants the open ground. Somewhere in that mix are tigers, taller, broader, a different gravity, rolling with the confidence of machines that have bullied their way across continents. To the west, the pressure answers back. The Livorno division eases out of cover toward the flats, lines of infantry stitched to a few tanks and guns, all of it angling to pinch the beachhead between two hard hands. The spaces between these advances are as dangerous as the men themselves. Ditches, lanes, low hills, places where a crack can widen into a breakthrough if it finds a seam. The dust makes distances lie. The dust makes everything seem closer and farther at the same time. On the sand, the American side feels thin. The big red one is here, but its shore artillery is still trying to stand up, pieces coming off landing craft, like bones that need to be set before they can bear weight. Mines and anti-tank guns exist in pockets, not a wall. A few bazookas feel like bravado against steel that thick. Air cover comes in stutters. One flight, then empty sky. Then the wrong planes at the wrong angle, then nothing but sun. The men tuck their chins and keep looking inland because looking out to sea feels like turning your back on a train. At Oro 8:10, a string of bombs thumps near the piers again, closer this time, shoving the water sideways in flat gray slabs. Machine gun streaks rake the sand above the seawall, green and white fire stitching the air. A jeep that had no business being that close fishtails and dies with a hiss, its hood jumping like a hand in a hot pan. The ranger at the wall tastes metal and thinks it's fear until he realizes it's just grit on his tongue. By Ojo 8:30, the first real shapes appear on the inland edge of vision. At this distance, tanks don't look like tanks. They look like mistakes the earth is making, rectangles moving where nothing should move. A German half-track cuts across a lane and gets too bold. 3 rifles and a machine gun snap at it out of reflex. The half-track answers with something meaner, and the shooters duck so fast they bruise their own knees. The radio man from the big red one tries to keep the net clean and fails because fear doesn't cue. He wipes his palm again. The handset is slick and heavy. The Axis plan is simple enough to feel like fate. Push fast, find soft ground, split the seam, seize the town, and drive the Americans into the sea. It isn't poetry. It doesn't need to be. The pressure alone might do the work. Out on the water, ships sit like punctuation marks waiting for a sentence. In between them and the sand is a corridor of guesswork and courage, spotters ashore, relays afloat, mines that have to turn moving maps into lines of fire. At 09:05, a German tank crests a low rise and shows its turret for one long second. The ranger doesn't know if it's a tiger or not. He only knows the world looks wrong when that much steel appears above a wheat field. A U.S. anti-tank gun farther up the beach kicks and throws smoke, and the shot goes high. A hurt sound that punches a hole in the dust and finds nothing. The gun crew works the breech with hands that look too pink in this light. The loader misses a rhythm, and the gun captain swears once in a voice that sounds like prayer. Ashore, a shore fire control party bends over a map that is already buckled and soft with sweat. The observer waits for the dust to drop half an inch, then calls a grid in a tone that feels borrowed from a calmer man. It climbs the net, past the radio man's ear, past a relay caged in metal, out across the water to a bridge where a captain has been leaning toward shore for 20 minutes, waiting to be needed. The request is a small thing in the vast morning, just numbers and letters. but the sea has been living for it. The Livorno thrust nudges closer from the west, infantry bodies flecking the fields behind a knot of armor and trucks. The line at that end of the beach shifts again, sliding a few yards to keep a drainage ditch between them and the oncoming. Two men move a spool of wire and then move it back because there is nowhere good for wire on a beach that might be run over. The ranger hears an engine cough and then smooth out and realizes it's his own breath. The radio man hears a voice he doesn't know say something about the town and the church, and a road that bends like an elbow, and for a second he can see the bend, even though he's never been there. At 0940, the leading panzers are close enough for detail, tools bolted to hulls, spare track links riding like shields, the smear of exhaust blowing straight back. A Tiger turns just a little too far and shows a flank like a dare. Somebody on the beach takes the dare, and a shot skips along armor like a thrown coin on a table. The coin comes back meaner, and a wall behind the seawall sneezes stone onto 4 helmets. The helmets keep moving. No one will remember the wall. "Stand by for naval fire," the handset says, not as drama, but as a promise. The phrase spreads along the beach faster than the sound can travel, men repeating it without meaning to, as if it were a prayer with moving parts. Far out, Boise and Savannah have already started their slow turn, presenting turrets to the plane. A destroyer like Laub tucks in closer, knifing the swell so tight the spray is white as chalk. On a plotting board, a pencil stops. On a bridge, a captain nods once. On the beach, a private lifts his eyes long enough to believe. The call rises another rung. A correction goes with it. A clean sliver carved off the first grid, because the dust has shifted and the tanks have drifted toward a track that wasn't there on last year's map. "Shot," the sea will say soon. Not yet. Every second is an anvil now. The axis hammer is almost at the head of the nail. The men on the sand measure the distance in heartbeats and barrel lengths and the time it takes a shell to cross 1.5 miles. The engines inland don't growl anymore. They roar. And out beyond the color line of the horizon, steel lungs fill. 10:40. The clock becomes a drum. Boise swings to bring all the weight she owns onto a strip of Sicilian earth that was wheat yesterday and war today. Savannah steadies, her turrets finding their lanes like old hunters. A destroyer rides the swell so close the anchor shadow crawls over green water. The first call hits the net, crisp and cold as a coin on a table. "Shot." The word leaves the sea and walks toward the shore. Men on the beach feel it in their ribs before they hear it. A thump that seems to rise out of the sand itself. A moment later, the horizon blinks and then the plane lifts in white pillars. The ranger at the seawall flinches, then grins without meaning to. "Splash," the voice says, and the beach exhales, short. "Left 200, fire for effect." Boys answers with a full-chested roar, 6-inch rifles hurling steel in a rhythm that makes deck plates hum. Savannah's guns take up the beat half a heartbeat behind, a rolling cadence that writes a straight line from open water to the road spilling down from Nisemi. Out front, Laub edges even closer, 5-inch mounts barking like guard dogs let off their chains, shells arcing low, mean, and fast. Jeffers slides in behind, then Glennon and Butler, rotating stations, slewing their bows to keep guns on, helmsmen working the wheels, as if weaving through a crowded street. The adjustment cycle becomes a language all its own. Spot, splash, add 100, drop 50, right 3 mils, fire for effect. An observer ashore watches the dust settle just enough to see a lane cut at a diagonal between 2 stone walls. He moves his pencil, breathes once, and reads the correction into a handset that now feels light. A minute later, those 2 walls don't exist. Where they stood is a gray curtain, and behind it, something stutters and dies with a grinding squeal. 10:46. A tiger shows itself long enough to make men on the beach forget everything else. It turns, easing into an angle to take the road that runs dead straight toward town. Savannah brackets the bend with 2 salvos that arrive like closing doors. The first walks in from the left, the second from the right. A near miss punches the earth under the tank's nose, and the whole machine rears like a spooked animal, track lurching off a sprocket. The crew inside disappears into brown air and ringing steel, and then the tank simply isn't moving anymore. The ranger doesn't cheer. He just remembers how to breathe. Laub finds a clump of vehicles trying to use a dry creek bed as a covered approach. 5-inch shells rake the gully, throwing dirt and timber into the air in sheets. A half-track claws at the far bank and slides back as if a hand has pushed it. Jeffers takes a cut at the same seam, walking rounds uphill until a truck blooming with infantry becomes a box of splinters. On the net, someone says, "Good bracket," like he's noting the weather. The radio man from the big red one blinks sweat from his eyelashes and reads the next grid with a voice that has stopped shaking. 10:53. The beach shrinks. Danger close becomes more than a phrase. The first salvo that lands just beyond the wire makes men duck hard enough to leave their helmets behind. Sand hits like rain. A medic laughs once because laughter is the only thing he can do when the world goes white for 2 seconds. Then the white clears and the approach road is gone, chopped into craters that swallow engines and spit them out sideways. A U.S. private peeks over the wall and sees a German crew bail out of a tank that hasn't burned yet. Shadows lurching through spray that smells like coins. Boise shifts fire to a crossroads where scouts swear the armor is regrouping. Her secondaries chatter at aircraft that never quite commit, tracer stitching the sky above the pillars of water. Savannah drops a ladder of fire along a hedgerow, rung after rung, until the hedge is sticks and smoke, and the shapes behind it scuttle backward in ones and twos. Glennon trades places with Butler, bow swinging, screws bubbling as she tucks in just enough to keep the solution steady. "Left 200, the observer says again, and the sea obliges, polite and murderous. 11:01, a German company commander tries to reknit his attack line on a dusty road that tilts toward Gela like a ramp. He gets 2 platoons into something like order before a pair of shells arrive, a fraction of a second apart. One just ahead of the lead tank, one just behind. The blasts lift the road itself. Men run without knowing where their legs want to go. Radios that were loud are suddenly quiet. The commander waves his arm at nothing, and for a moment, the only sound on that piece of earth is wheat rubbing against itself in the hot wind. The beach starts to believe, not in victory yet, but in time. Time to get a gun unlimbered and cross-leveled. Time to move ammo boxes into a place that isn't suicide. Time to check a line of sight and find it still there. The ranger leans his cheek against the seawall and feels it vibrate as another broadside rolls in, slow and inevitable as weather. He has the strangest thought, that the ships are breathing for them. 11:10. The air changes color. Dust goes gray, then olive, then nearly black, where shells have plowed the ground into wet clay. A tiger tries to swing around the worst of it and cuts into a field that looked firm from a distance. Boise lands 2 near misses that jump the earth under the tank's belly. The machine drops a foot and refuses to climb back out. The crew hammers at a hatch. Nothing moves right for them anymore, not in this hour. Savannah's gunnery officer runs a finger down a column and feels the oil and grit grind under his nail. He calls one more salvo to close a gap between lanes of fire. On the bridge, the captain nods again, without meaning to, and the quartermaster swallows because his mouth is ash. Farther in, Laub shoulders a swell and slams another string of 5-inch into the low ground in front of a column trying to sprint the last 500 yards. The column stops being a column. It becomes pieces. 11:22. The net ashore crackles with words that sound like relief and orders at the same time. Shift. Repeat. Take the road. Mark splash. An observer who hasn't unclenched his jaw in an hour watches a stray goat run across a field and vanish in steam. He blinks it away and calls another correction, finds his own voice smooth as if the sea has given it back to him. Jeffers trades a few seconds with Glennon to rake a lane the armor keeps trying to use. 2 salvos, walk them in, walk them back, and the lane is a sawtooth. A truck claws for reverse and doesn't get it. A second truck rear ends it. Men spill out the sides and run into a world where every direction is wrong. Butler's rounds fall at the edge of town, close enough that the ranger feels heat on the side of his face where there shouldn't be any heat. He ducks, swears, smiles. The line holds because the ground in front of it is being taken apart faster than men can cross it. 11:34. The big guns do something almost gentle, a lull of seconds, then a precise pair that fences off the far edge of a vineyard. It isn't mercy, it's geometry, cutting the map into shapes the enemy can't use. A German officer shouts into a handset and hears nothing but static and someone else's prayers. He throws the radio down and it bounces once and dies. The dust that had been theirs all morning belongs to the ships now. 11:42. The hour lands. Boise's turrets ease, barrels warm, and breathing heat into air that already shimmers. Savannah's cadence slackens by barely a heartbeat, just enough for men to notice that the world has not ended, that it might continue with them in it. The destroyers hold their nerves at the line, where depth turns treacherous, trading places with the grace of dancers in a crowded room. The last ordered salvo of the sequence goes out with the same indifference to fear as the first. It finds a crossroads that had become a promise for the attackers and turns it into a question with no answer. On the beach, the ranger lets his shoulders drop an inch. The radio man lowers the handset for the first time and realizes his hand has forgotten how to open. A private who had been certain the tanks were coming all the way to the surf looks up and sees instead a stitched plane, torn and smoking, with shapes moving backward into their own dust. The sea is quiet for a breath, and in that breath everyone hears the same thing. The turn. The hammer that had been falling all morning has missed the nail, not by luck, by guns, by steel lungs that breathed at the right hour. The enemy is still there. The day is not finished, but the window that could have broken the beach has been closed, locked, and braced by ships that never touch the sand. Afternoon slides in like a hand over the sun. Heat pools in the hollows and makes the plain shimmer, the kind of glare that hides movement and reveals mistakes. Out beyond the seawall, the stitched ground smokes and breathes, and the armor that had been a single blade now looks like pieces of metal scattered after the cut went wrong. Columns that started as straight lines now curl at the edges, looking for lanes that aren't there. The air is full of small sounds, loose track clanking, shouted names with no answer, a gearbox coughing itself toward silence. On the axis net, orders sag into arguments. A company tries to pivot around a crater field and walks into a fresh bracket, shells falling just close enough to make the world forget what forward means. A tiger idles behind a farmhouse wall, pocked white by near misses. The crew inside counting seconds between detonations and lying to each other about how many they've counted. An officer points toward the town, as if pointing can make distance obey. It doesn't. Every approach road is a map of someone else's handwriting now. Near the beach, Americans use their time like thieves. A gun that had been a problem all morning finally sits level. Its crew works with faces so calm they look carved. Ammunition boxes leap hand to hand like buckets on a fire line. A corporal who lost his voice at dawn gets it back just long enough to teach a younger man how to judge angle with his thumb against the horizon. A medic pulls gauze from a pocket that has become a cave and ties it without looking down. The ranger at the wall rolls his shoulders and feels grit grind under the straps. He leans up, takes one long look, and ducks again. Not from fear, but from habit that has become wisdom. Out on the water, the ships hold their chord. The tempo is slower now, the notes cleaner, corrections shorter, the kind of fire you use to keep a door shut once you've slammed it. Boise lifts a lane 100 yards, and the lane ceases to exist. Savannah walks a staggered pair along the edge of a ditch, and the ditch forgets which way it runs. Laub and her sisters swap stations without speaking, keeping their bows where the depth is honest and the guns can still reach. The plotting boards shine with pencil scars and sweat, and the men who read them talk less, because the map in their heads has finally learned the shore's language. By mid-afternoon, the truth settles hard enough to have weight. The big push has unwound. You can feel it even without a radio. The enemy's horns turn inward. The dust that had come straight at the town now drifts sideways. A road that had been an arrow becomes an eraser. Somewhere behind those lines, decisions get made in rooms without windows. At the head of the Sicilian command, General Alfredo Guzzoni reads the day the same way the ships and the beach have read it. The cost of one more shove will buy nothing but wreckage. The order goes out: halt the major counterattack, pull back, save what can be saved for tomorrow. The words find their way through static and fear and pride and arrive at the point of contact as a quiet that feels like rain dying on hot stone. Late in the day, the bay writes its own headline. A Liberty ship out beyond the piers, SS Robert Rowan, takes the wrong wounds from the sky. Fire blooms on her like a second sun. And then the sun learns manners. The blast goes up in a pillar that seems to grow a spine, black and red and orange licking itself into shapes no one will ever forget. The concussion slaps the water flat. then rips it into fists. Men on the beach duck by instinct, and then stand to watch because there is no not watching. The ranger feels the heat on his teeth. The radio man tastes smoke in a place smoke shouldn't get. For a half minute, the war is only light and pressure, and a roar that pounds the chest until the heart gives in and beats to its rhythm. When the column collapses, the air fills with soft things that shouldn't be here. Paper, ash, a fluttering scrap of canvas that tries to be a bird and fails. The ships hold their silence for a few breaths, then return to work, as if they've nodded once to the dead and then remembered the living still need them. The beach remembers too. Someone says a name and gets an answer. Someone else doesn't. The line holds steadier now, anchored not just by guns, but by the fact that the worst did not happen at the water's edge. Evening finds the plain with its shoulders slumped. The edges of the town glint. The church tower looks less like a witness and more like a survivor. Far inland, dust trails peel away from the roads and climb the ridges toward Caltagirone. The retreat isn't a rout, not yet. It's a measured backward walk done by men who know when stubbornness becomes waste. In the half-light, you can see the logic of it. Pull the armor out of the dead ground, fold the infantry back into the hills, make the Americans climb tomorrow if they want to finish what they started today. Night takes the heat in handfuls, but leaves the smell. The sea breathes slower. A destroyer's wake glows faintly with plankton and diesel, ghosting the curve she's traced all day. On shore, a private who swore he'd never sleep again puts his head on his pack and is gone in 10 seconds. Another man can't close his eyes, so he watches the sky and counts the streaks of distant aircraft that never come near. On the net, the words are fewer and kinder. Water, morphine, wire, thank you, Roger. Farther out, a cruiser's turret motors whine once, settle, and go still. 12th of July wakes up smaller. The pushes that do come arrive as stabs, not punches. Probing attempts that run into fields already measured by naval guns and infantry who have learned the ground with their knees. A column tries to skirt a line of craters and finds fresh ones made to order. A half-dozen men use a farmhouse as a stepping stone and discover it has become the center of a crosshair. The destroyers don't need to risk the sandbar today. They speak from a respectful distance and still make their point. Ashore, the Big Red One's artillery digs in with the satisfaction of tools finally fitting their hands. Bazookas sit where they might matter. The wire that had nowhere good to go finds fences and corners that make sense. By noon, the rhythm is clear. The attacks break like waves that can't find the old tide line. The sea keeps its voice low, reminding rather than shouting. The beach smells of fuel and hot iron. The first flies of summer arrive to make an honest nuisance of themselves. The men notice ordinary things again. A button missing, a canteen that leaks, a joke from last month that still works. They also notice what's missing, the sound of engines deciding the future. The surf is foul with a sheen that will cling to boots for days. The air has a metallic edge that never really leaves. But the line holds, and not with luck. It holds because the window in the whole shore might have snapped was nailed shut by steel that never touched land. In the quiet between salvos, you can hear the beach remembering how to be a beach again. Waves, wind, gulls, breath. And under it all, a low tremor that isn't fear anymore. It's resolve, running deep as the keel of a ship. Morning after smells like pennies and wet rope. The sea wears a tired shine. The town breathes in short, sore breaths. Men step around holes that weren't here yesterday and talk in quiet voices because loud ones feel disrespectful. A ranger runs a palm along the seawall and finds it warm with memory. The radio man flexes the hand that forgot how to open and laughs under his breath at the miracle of fingers. Out beyond the surf, gray holes idle like guardians who know the monsters for now have gone back under the bed. What happened at Gela was not magic. It was an hour, narrow as a bottleneck, when everything ashore was fragile and everything afloat was ready. In that short window, belief became a weapon. Shore parties called with dust in their mouths. Ships answered with steel and discipline. Destroyers pressed in until the bottom warned them off. Cruisers cut roads out of the map as if erasing lines could erase intent. The counterattack did not break on a wall of sandbags or a perfect plan. It broke on timing and reach. It broke on guns that could move faster than tanks could think. Commanders learned. They would not forget that the first hours of an amphibious landing live or die by whether the sea can speak for the shore. From this beach forward, naval gunfire was not decoration. It was the umbrella you snapped open before the storm hit full. It was the promise you made to soldiers who could not yet dig deep enough. It was the reason a thin line could hold while heavier tools found their places and heavier promises could be kept. In briefings that followed, men drew smaller circles for the ships, closer arcs, bolder plans. They trusted the horizon because they had heard it answer. Infantry remembered too. They remembered the way the earth lifted under a broadside and came down safer than it had any right to be. They remembered pillars of water walking across the plain like giants with purpose. They remembered the way the air changed color when a tiger's courage met a near miss that felt like an earthquake. Years later, they would try to describe it to people who had never seen a gun flash from a cruiser's bow and make a road vanish and realize words weren't quite enough. Then they would say it simply, "The ships breathe for us. There was a price. There is always a price. Names that won't be said out loud because the voice that knows how to say them is gone." The Robert Rowan's flame stamped into the back of the eye, a column that rose and seemed to write letters on the sky, and then smeared them into grief. The quiet, almost embarrassed way men look at the places where they were small and lucky. But grief here wears a second face. Gratitude. Gratitude that the waterline did not become a graveyard line. Gratitude that a plan on paper became a hand that reached into a killing ground and pulled the morning back. Walk the beach now, and it tells the story without words. The surf lifts and drops and smooths the edges of the day until only the shapes remain. Craters hold the sky like mirrors. A torn road points nowhere. The church tower looks down with the complicated eyes of a survivor. And far offshore, the ships sit with the posture of men who have done what they came to do and will stay until the dark is no longer dangerous. History will count tonnages and calibers and grids and call signs. It will chart the push and the pull, the lanes taken away and the lanes created, the order given to halt and the roads chosen for retreat. It will note that on the afternoon of the 11th, the counterattack folded in on itself, and on the 12th, it tried to breathe and found the air already owned. But what stays isn't only the map, it's the sound. A deep, patient voice rolling in from the horizon, saying, "Not yet, not today. You don't get the beach." Close your eyes, and you can still hear it. The long inhale as turrets train. The hold your breath hush before shot. The world-thumping exhale that makes dust leap and men keep going. You can feel a rifle cool under your palm, a deck plate hum under your boots, the stutter of a handset that suddenly sounds like a friend. You can watch a soldier finally uncurl his fingers from a hot stock, one by one, amazed they still work. You can see a sailor spit foam from his lips and grin, a rope burn bright on his forearm, a smear of soot turning his smile into a hard-earned crescent. And you can stand, for a moment, in the streets of Gela as the echo of guns fades down the alleys and the town learns to trust its heartbeat again. This is what the beach means now, not just a place where land meets sea, but a line where men decided the line would hold, not because they were stronger or braver than anyone else who ever tried ashore, but because their voices reached farther than the tanks did, because on a certain morning in July, the horizon belonged to them. This video's content is compiled from multiple sources. If anything is inaccurate or needs clarification, please comment below. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.